Welcome back to the Virtually Vikings radio show, the half-hour program that will be discussing all things St. John's River State College. Each week, we'll be spotlighting a new degree or program, events, or resources that are offered through the college. I'm your host, Mickey Johns, and today we're diving into a degree that has an ever-growing career opportunities. That's right, we're talking about the Associates of Science degree of Engineering Technology. Today, we have Tim Gilboy to help us navigate the program and all of its opportunities it offers. Thanks so much for joining me today, Tim.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to be here and help you out.
It's definitely one of those big mystifying things when it comes to engineering. People have one idea of what engineering is. Can you kind of give us a idea of exactly what our engineering technology program is here?
Sure. One thing is we are engineering technology, and that's a big difference between when most people say engineering and we're thinking of a 4-year program and a bachelor's of science and say mechanical engineering versus or bachelor's of science in electrical engineering or even a bachelor's of science in computer engineering. And what we really are is in some sense more difficult because we are all of those wrapped up more in a hands-on approach aspect rather than the deep dive theory. So we are able to accomplish this in a 2-year as an associate of science degree. The other big difference, what separates just when the traditional engineering and what we are teaching here as engineering technologists and engineering technology is the level of math. And that goes along with more of the design aspect, whereas what we do is more hands-on aspect where the students do have to learn critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills, but that is really equated to, in my mind, being strong in Algebra 1 skills and being able to set up equations, known and unknowns, based on collecting what we do as the physical data in the field and then being able to understand the science and a level of math, which is the critical thinking and the problem solving aspect that if you don't necessarily have it, we do train it and try to learn it. And eventually then those skills will go out into the field to be kind of the front line, making sure that things are operating properly. So it's, in some sense, it's more. It's way more than that traditional engineer. There can be in some other specs. It depends on literally where you end up in this. You could be have a very specific role, and you're a master of certain instruments or gauges, or you might have to eventually learn entire systems. And generally now where we're getting with the automation is if you learn how the general systems work, you can apply them across the board to different types of systems, like two motors or controls, or to other types of energy systems like hydraulics and pneumatics. But we're discussing that, whether we could discuss this for a half hour. We could discuss this for a really long time. And as we had said before, that's almost for another show where we could dive deeper. But to get through what we're trying to offer here in terms of our program with an Associates of Science and Engineering Technology, I think we should move on to some other questions.
Of course. I mean, it's one of those you think you know, but you don't know. And within that, there's 3 different tracks. Can you talk about the different certifications or tracks that we offer?
Yeah,
Specifically, like what those are?
and that's a huge advantage to us is, I mean, when we're getting out people in a couple of years with a real skill set and we can get deeper into, the opportunities and, what to expect coming out in terms of salaries and all that, and it's decent salary. But we break it down too with kind of opportunity to fit your schedule. And we don't have a tradition, our traditional students. I don't know if there's such a thing for us because it's all different types. So sometimes we get sent students that are just learning, or we're at an industry and they want to get a certificate like a support specialist. So we have an engineering technologist support specialist, which is our basic core 6 classes. And then that transitions into our next certificate would be megatronics, which is as you accumulate more and more classes. While you're doing that, as you're getting close to your megatronics certificate, you're actually getting close to your actual Associates in Science, your AS degree. And then we have a couple other peripheral certificates, specializing in robotics. And with the robotics, it's a quick emphasis on basic robotics and then how to manipulate and program, which is through PLCs, programmable logic controllers. And so kind of along the way, or pick and choose, depends on what you're starting for, what you're looking for. You can have that option or go all the way through to the 2-year program.
And the idea is, like you just said, there's so many things along the way that maybe the 2-year program isn't for you right off. You can always get those certifications and then maybe kind of complete it on as you go on. But we have so many things built in that, you can at least get started with it.
Yeah. So there's no reason not to get started with some classes and get started through some of our certification.
And you mentioned like the math, kind of like that stigma of the math on my end when everybody hears engineering. What are those key courses students are taking? It's not, high level math. What would you say for the program that students are going to be looking at?
That's a really good question. And this might be one of the first things that turns a lot of people off is they fear the math if they were taught that. And the reality is the math is strong Algebra 1 skills. And we actually have a a manufacturing math class that is part of our program that we help. So we understand that and help get those points across. We also realize a lot of our students haven't maybe been in a math class in a while, particularly if they are coming from an industry or were in industry and now are trying to advance themselves in that particular industry. And in order to do that, a lot of times you do need to have some certificates or even degrees along the way. And so we have brought that course in. It is one of our electives. The baseline requirement is basically just our Algebra 1, an Algebra 1. You don't have to have the high level calculus you may have heard of or up there. In Algebra 1, some basic trigonometry, solving using triangles, but of course, where they're used and applied at our level, they're incorporated in our coursework. So it's not really something to be super afraid of. Obviously, if you just don't like math at all, I have a few artist friends that fear math. I still don't understand why. I can't paint a picture. They swear I know they could do math, but that is, because that's the baseline of what we do as engineering technologists is we're problem solvers and we're critical thinkers. We don't really there's not a formula that's going to fit your situation when you get out in the field because we just got to get it done in order to continue to produce. And that's, if you can just imagine walking into a facility and all the different types of technologies that are used to produce something simple. And so, now the other thing is I want to say is, I don't want to feel you don't have to know everything when you step out of our program. We give you that baseline. And then a lot of what happens with our engineering technologists is I think we give you the opportunity to go get a decent paying job. And then if you show your worth in this industry, you will be rewarded. They're not going, these companies and these manufacturers and these industries and their automation facilities, whatever they might be, it doesn't have to be manufacturing anymore. It could be service things like electrical power companies, water companies. They're all going to the same type of automation. And the opportunity is there for that student after they get through a 2-year program to really take off. And I've had in my short time here, I've had some success with some of my students.
And that's like the main idea is, again, that math thing is kind of hangs it up, but also within that program, how much is more hands-on versus classroom theory? You mentioned when we were prepping that was a big stigma for you. I always think it's something that if you like working with your hands, this is a good program for you. Am I telling people right when I say things like that?
Yes, it's obviously that the key that doesn't have to, that doesn't necessarily just because, the biggest thing I always hear is, oh, if they play with Legos, they're going to do well in my program. And that's not, and that, that's working with your hands. But there's other aspects. It's because it's, you have it like a deep mind. Like I always say, like, if you looked at a doorknob and we just wondered how that mechanism works and mechanisms and the mechanics. And so that's kind of where we got our start with real engineering technology. But then we had to evolve it to, well, how do we control these things? And so that's the electrical side. We had to understand that. and then other ways, and then how do we program that electrical device? So that's what we're evolving to now, is in the full automation, and we incorporate that through teaching PLCs, which are programmable logic controllers. It's be, people are starting to hear of this word. I don't think many people had heard of it, even even engineers and stuff hadn't heard of it 15 years ago. Now it's pretty prevalent coming up, but it's a baseline of basically how you get the machines to do the work through communication through our computer systems.
And with all of that, in all of our programs, we've talked about how up to date and how technology-wise we're keeping our students up to date with that. What kind of equipment do the students work with within the engineering program when in our labs?
Yes, and this gets back to you. I think you'd asked. I didn't really answer it about the hands-on, and I went down because we do a lot of hands-on. Every one of our labs is extremely everything. There's components that we go work on, whether it's in our programmable logics class, and we work with PLCs to get them to turn on automated systems. Motors and controls, the same thing. Obviously, we're turning on motors, and then how do you control those motors and turning things on and off? The big deal in manufacturing is you're really controlling on and off, because you're turning something on to do a process to do work for us, and then we turn it off and we turn something else on. But it has to be controlled, right, for many reasons, to be productive, safety, which we also stress that. But so the hands-on aspect is for our labs, every one of them, more so than when my traditional engineering, bachelor's of science engineering, didn't get to touch as much stuff, and so that's where the hands-on part. But why I'm not a big fan of just the hands-on, because, for instance, we're doing a hydraulics lab right now in the middle of course, they're getting, this is good or bad. It's hydraulics labs. It's a little messy. Sometimes you got to wear an apron or wear your old clothes. And so, but the labs are taking a long time. We could just set the system up and do it, but we're trying to predict. So in the midst of it, while we're doing the setup, we're also doing some basic physical science math, things like pressure, force, and area, and understanding the relationship between them. And if you understand that relationship between them, that basic science, then you don't need a lab, because what we do at the labs is we prove a lot of the theory so that we know in the future when we have to go, well, we need to find the right size, say, piston to move an object that's big enough that it'll work. And so you can size the right piston. And so it's very much hands-on, but it's also, that's why I said basic problem-solving skills, critical thinking, which takes back to Algebra 1. Solving, we'll usually know, you have an unknown, and we have a bunch of knowns. And then we set that up and solve for X. And so it is simple Algebra 1. And everybody, we teach in Florida, and everybody in Florida had to graduate Algebra 1 to get a high school diploma. So, and some of the high level, some of the stuff that a lot of wasteful stuff maybe in that course, but the basic solving the X and setting up your variables. And then we also teach that. So very much hands-on, but it's not just you're not just doing hands-on. And I literally, like in our hydraulics and pneumatics lab, I lecture very little. With the material, I supplement them. Now the lecturing happens in the middle of while they're working on the labs as we go over things. So that is a huge advantage. That is what a lot of students do, like that aspect, and I like that aspect, for sure. And it's not just because it's fun. It is more fun. Absolutely, it's more fun. We have the most fun, but it's practical, and that's what you're gonna, you're gonna do in the real world. You're gonna have to get your hands dirty. Eventually, if you keep working your way up, then you get into the higher level engineering position where you don't do much work, and then you're thinking more. But as we go through our track, which is kind of what the engineering technology route has opened up, is I can go get a degree in 2 years and go to a business and end up where, say, someone like myself, after going for all those years of education, and yeah, you really can in today's day and age. I don't know if that was the truth a while ago, but there's a need and a demand for people that are trained in automation, in manufacturing and automation.
And I know you named a few of them, but can you kind of go over like the types of careers again? I know of us working before with some of the airplane mechanic type options in that respect, but I know there's a few other automation programs around. Like, what does automation exactly mean, I guess? Really, what would they be doing?
Well, it's pretty much anything in manufacturing now is what it's become. And, it used to be that this concept of automation was a subset of your advanced manufacturing. And the reality is now, it's not even in manufacturing. We're using automation everywhere, in our daily lives. And so the, the idea of finding a job with this skill set is just it's going to be about anywhere, to be honest with you. Number one, right, the problem solving aspect, and whether you're at a logistics company now, they're using this, and there's a lot of logistics company in this area. Even if
Mm-hmm.
you're, and moving into, uh, our traditional, we have a lot of along Jacksonville, a lot of traditional, like petrochemical facilities, and more so than people realize up along the river in Jacksonville. Our agricultural industry, there's a huge push where that's turning over and becoming more modernized, where that equipment now runs on PLCs and is extremely automated. Is only going to because the whole systems are automated. And so in the general area, quite a bit of opportunity. Mainstay company that's got the presence here is and we've employed a few people there, and they've had successes like Johnson and Johnson, and that's a really interesting kind of manufacturing. That's a really clean manufacturing. I mean, based on what the product that they are making, they're going in your eyes. So it's a clean air conditioned facility. I have some people working at some of my current students and that recently have gotten a job there doing basically it's a steel company. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. It's not quite as, air conditioned and clean. But it's still not because we've moved into this automation and the sensitivity of our equipment, and um, industry it's not the same manufacturing industry that it used to be, like say where my grandfather went to work in the steel mills. Those miserable
Right.
conditions. That has enormously changed. And so now, as a result, the requirement of the engineering technician or the technician is a little bit higher. They have to understand some basic things like, and then we get to, which we haven't really talked about yet, the newest aspect, the communication between the systems. And so now we got to understand things like what is IP addresses and stuff like that, because each machine has that. And, you know, this is where I started the whole conversation. Our engineering tech, sometimes I feel like I'm training them to be mechanical engineers. I'm training them to be electrical engineers. I'm training to be computer science engineers, because they have to have a flavor of it all to go be that successful frontline person. And then then hopefully maybe there's someone with a veteran or somebody that they can go, get some resources for, or they got to figure it out. And that's a lot of what I stress to my students too, is I put them in situations, and because that's what's going to happen. They're going to look at you, and right or wrong, say problem solving. You can see if you can solve it. Sometimes you can't, right? Or go find, you gotta figure that out. But that's part of the problem solving process that we try to train them. So a lot of opportunity, a lot of opportunity. You move down to, we're moving into the huge funding for the semiconductor and chip industry, and this concept of taking back Silicon Valley. And there's enormous, enormous funding going on in Florida, like over the next few years. Enormous. This is the perfect segue into that opportunity. Um, and so I think really like my 2 year, it's an opportunity. Is almost what and is it for everybody? No, but maybe for, people that are like, I don't like my current opportunity, or I want to try another opportunity, or or maybe I just want an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's kind of really what I'm very proud that I think that we do for a very fair price. That's what and I think we produce decent, I think there's decent product coming out and fill the void, and, industry needs it. That's for sure.
That was a very modest way of saying we have a very great program with a wonderful opportunity there. And you kind of mentioned all the different opportunities as far as career based. with all of those different aspects, whether looking for a new career or starting that new career opportunity, there's really not a typical student or a typical day for that program, right? You had mentioned before it's kind of all over the map.
Yes. When we were prepping for this and talking about if I wanted to answer what my traditional or typical student is, that's the other thing I kind of is neat is I don't really have a traditional student. I'm actually starting to see the traditional student a little more as the stereotypes have broken down, as oh, maybe my son's or my daughter is going into to be an engineering tech or doing with manufacturing. That stigma that wasn't maybe the most popular thing to say is kind of breaking down. We're starting to realize the value of it. It's not just these laborers in there. Oh, the laborers going to work. And I'm not, and trust me, I'm not diminishing that. That's, the backbone of everything that I believe. But that's just a reality and so I'm starting to see the more traditional student. What I mean by that is the person out of high school. I rarely would get that student. And this is also why, we host our courses in the afternoon and evenings. And of course, the traditional student's always available, and I'd love to do it a little bit earlier. And sometimes, we would too, but we have to cater our program to the worker. And always have a group of students that maybe they can't get there till a certain time, so that's why we do the program in the afternoon, and try to cater to everybody's success with this because there's not that traditional student. And it could even be one of my more recent students is a mother, and she didn't get the opportunity a few years ago, and so she's not the traditional student out of high school, and so she seized it and she's doing well, and that's what I'm proud of. That local here, we can give people that opportunity, and it falls back to um, our President Pickens stresses this, and I believe this, and it's community colleges, and I'm from the area, and this concept, we used to be called community colleges, and
Mm-hmm.
it is the community, and that is the heart and soul of what we do, and that's what we're targeting for our industry. We don't have, my case is I'm going to go send some of you guys up into Duval, but because that's where there's more industry and they need it, but and around here, we have our opportunities in our counties too, but that in terms of jobs, and you go even further south, like we were talking about down to Orlando and Tampa. And so if you're willing to, and then we talk about the community, and then if you're just willing to, once you get this opportunity to then go try to expand it and maybe move out of Jacksonville, a lot of opportunity in doing this. And so I think that's why we don't have the traditional student, because I think people are starting to realize that. And and now if I just give me the opportunity, and that's what usually my students do. Right? And I've seen it happen over the few years I've been doing this.
That's funny because that was my next question was kind of what was the advice you would give someone who's thinking about this program? Um, what would you say to somebody who was thinking about taking the opportunity? What would you say?
Um, it's pretty good opportunity for a fair price. If you've always thought about doing and the engineering type stuff, we're afraid, I'm not going to be. Come try. You'd be surprised. A lot of I was once a couple students I was talking to. I remember right early on was commenting, didn't think he'd be successful at this, and is extremely successful. And it falls back to I think some of the stigmas. The one thing I will say, sometimes it's not glamorous. I've been talking. And the reality is uh, what this kind of field is I always talk about opportunity, but sometimes to create opportunity, you got to do, you got to work, you got to do some
Mm-hmm.
things, and you got to do, your time, whatever that, in the sense to seize that opportunity. And that's kind of a reality of what, if you come out with this and get into a career with your AS in engineering technology, right? It's, yeah, there's probably going to be some long, rough, messy days, right? And I see it with my students that are doing this, and we're getting educated to get pay advancements or promotions. And a lot of times, that's just the way it is. Some of the, I have one student in particular that is about to graduate that um, I'd met him because he'll get a pay raise, once he gets his degree, his AS degree. And fortunately, he's a good student. I know he'd pass, but they gave him the raise and are contingent that he will pass. So he will, but
Always good to hear success stories. Is
Yes.
there one specifically that kind of sticks out to you that you want to brag about a student?
I've talked about a few, and I could talk about a bunch, and I haven't had a ton of students. That's which is, we're not huge, we've had a lot of students when we do programs with workforces, but just as
Mm-hmm.
when I say I haven't, the going to college student, not through our work programs, um,
We don't get to
and
keep them for very long when they're with the work
yeah,
programs.
yeah, and they're usually, yeah, exactly. It's like they're getting the technology. When we've done that, they're getting that technology support specialist certificate with the 6 classes, which is it was a good deal. It's a good deal. But then
Mm-hmm.
I don't get to dive as deep with the students because those are the surface classes, and then we don't get into the more in-depth labs and where we can consolidate, the stuff we learned in the foundational classes to build or to create real automated systems. Um, I'm sorry, we went on? What was the question?
You're good. I was just if there was a specific student success story besides,
Oh, I did, and I will, and he just happened, and I've had so many, but this one I'm going to particularly mention because he just
yeah.
contacted me, and it's a good segue to discuss. We've been talking about going straight to work. I've been
Mm-hmm.
talking about the A, our AS route, and then there's opportunity at work, decent pay, you know, decent pay. I'm not going to give you say a figure because it varies, but decent pay.
Yeah.
But then the reality is that decent pay, if you show your worth at most of these places in about 6 months, it's even more decent pay. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
keep you around. That's the beauty of what we do. It's not, and if not, go find somewhere else. Once you have skill set, and then once you get some experience, that's the key. And so, the other route though is we do have opportunity where you can continue on. We have an articulation program, which means that the courses that you take in our program actually transfer directly to a couple of like our sister programs, Daytona State, because they actually have a Bachelor's of Science program
Okay.
in advanced manufacturing. And so, that is I have had a few people do that. That's not what most people are doing. Most are coming to get their AS, but I did have a particular student who kind of was doing both. He came and got his AS, found out about this opportunity. He ended up going to enrolling into Daytona State. You're immediately accepted. Now there is some caveats on the math. You have to catch up the math. That's and then we get deeper into that if someone's, if you come and are interested in that. They still, to go to that next level for this articulation, you eventually got to get to the calculus level stuff, which is what requires a BS. And so they come into our program, and this particular student just didn't have the opportunity. He had a couple kids. He's in his late 20s, had been in the service. I see a lot of service people had gone and was working at a local facility and took opportunity of a program. From that program, ended up parlaying. Well, after he graduated, he got in with one of the local companies, Johnson and Johnson. Did very successful as an engineering tech, entry level, rose the ranks. Actually, we stayed in touch. He continued his working towards his degree while he was working. So he was doing both. That's how I met him. It's kind of my students. A lot of my students are like that. They're going to get the job done. Even for what, I know that's why I love my students in that sense. Uh, you know, Continued on, called me like last week, 2 weeks ago, or whenever they graduated to tell me that he finally graduated. And of course, his comment was, I finally did. And, for me, there's no finally. It was 3.5 years later or whatever it might be, but he did. And that whole time, he rose the ranks. And he's parlayed that, obviously, showing up, not really knowing what he wanted to do, but kind of had a general feel of, I like this engineering technology stuff. And this goes back to, yes, he did like to use his hands, so that is, it can be a trait. And now he's, you know, about to get the higher level engineering position that was what his goals were
His goal the whole
after
time.
he got on his path here. And so it can be very different. It just depends. And I could go back. I think for the student I know as a mother, I think she just wanted to go back to school and challenge, obviously, and go from there. But that was, she had mentioned that I liked this stuff when I was last in school, the physics stuff or the science stuff, because it is all, I kind of have, I guess I just assumed that when I say it, but we're all based in that basic physical science realm, okay,
Mm-hmm.
forces and energy and how that works and operates. And so we go back and forth. And so, like, this gets back to what's our typical student? I don't know.
And that's kind of an awesome way to wrap that one up, is that there's definitely opportunities out there, and it's not going to be limited to what you're going to find in the classroom as far as who you're walking in there with either. For anybody that's interested in the program, how would they find out more information or apply to the college for it?
Well, obviously on our webpage, if you go to our
Yeah.
webpage, there's a engineering technology link. And then in there, you can also, if you know, I think if you get in touch with us and forward me an email somehow or communicate or come up to our facility here in Orange Park, where we are on the Orange Park campus. Um, we have a lab coordinator too, which could be another success story. He's one of my former students, but that's for another show. And he's usually in there, so you don't have to schedule anything. So if you're in the area, like I said, if you're local or thinking of what to do and just want to check it out, and then you can actually see the facility, the equipment we're talking about, the lab equipment that, you know, we got a lot of it. I said, but, come look at it. If you walk in there, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's a lot, I didn't even, I didn't this is why this was a great little thing, because I didn't mention the coolest thing, because it's every robotics. We didn't even mention robotics over and over and over. Ultimately that's what we
I
are.
know, I tried to stay away from it for you.
Because then everybody's like, I don't know, nobody quite understands what that is. So you're going to really understand what robotics is, and that's kind of what I've been saying. The application of our automated systems to have something to work for. Okay, and so, um, you know, it's 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 just go there, and if you look on the webpage and then reach out to one of us or talk to somebody, we'll be more than glad to give you a little bit one-on-one too.
I know your lab is always a popular one when we have guests on campus, so definitely coming and visiting is always a highlight. And unfortunately, I know we have so much to talk about. Unfortunately, we are out of time today. I do want to thank you for joining me and helping me explain the opportunity that we offer with the AS and engineering technology. So thank you so much, Tim.
Sure. Hopefully we made it clearer and not more confusing. And if it is more, please contact us and we'll be glad to help you out.
If nothing else, we enlightened a little bit more. I learned definitely more.
Very good.
And thank you for tuning in to the Virtually Viking, your go-to source for all things St. John's River State College. We hope today's discussion has inspired you to take your next step in your educational journey, or even when you're thinking about changing careers. Obviously, we have great opportunities that way. Whether you're looking to start that new career, advance in a current one, like we just talked about, or simply explore new subjects, SJR State has the resources and support you need to succeed. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, or have more information about our programs and services, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. You can email us at virtuallyvikings@sjrstate.edu. We're here to help you every step of the way. Until next time, go Vikings!
Bye.